We love them. We shouldn't, but we do. The man who broke every rule the world gave him, and somehow we find ourselves hoping he gets away with it. Not because we're broken, but because somewhere, buried beneath everything we've been taught to believe about good and evil, we recognize something in him, something we've never been allowed to say out loud. He wasn't the hero he was never supposed to be. And yet, history remembers him, not with silence, not with shame, with fascination. That's not an accident. That's a confession. A confession that the line between hero and villain was never as clean as we pretended. That sometimes the person who changed the world was also the person who terrified it. That the ones history calls monsters were also, in some uncomfortable, undeniable way, human. This isn't a story about bad people doing good things. This is a story about what it means when we can't stop watching someone destroy themselves and everything around them, and feeling something close to awe. Because the anti-hero doesn't just exist in film. He existed in the streets of Carthage, in the war rooms of the Third Reich's opposition, in the back rooms of the American Civil Rights Movement, in the blood-soaked genius of surgeons who broke the law to save lives. History is full of them, and we've been told to look away. But we never do. Who the anti-hero really is. Before we go further, we need to agree on something. Because most people get this wrong. The anti-hero is not simply a villain with good intentions. He is not a good man who made one bad choice. He is something more destabilizing than either of those things. The anti-hero is a person who operates outside the moral consensus of their time, using methods that the world condemns, in pursuit of something the world later admits it needed. He is the person who looked at the accepted order and said, "This system is the real crime," and then did something about it. Ugly, messy, unforgivable, necessary. History is littered with them. Men and women who we canonize in textbooks with careful, sanitized language, who, in their actual lifetimes, were despised, hunted, called terrorists, criminals, madmen. People who, if they were alive today, we might cross the street to avoid. But here's what makes them worth studying. Here's what makes them worth feeling. Every single one of them, every genuine historical anti-hero, was produced by a system that left them no other choice. Or at least, that's what they believed. And the terrifying thing is, sometimes they were right. Scene by scene, life by life. The man who saved lives to save himself. Let's start with the one that feels safest. Because Oskar Schindler is the anti-hero we're most comfortable celebrating. Steven Spielberg gave him golden light and a redemption arc and Liam Neeson's jaw, and we walked out of theaters weeping, feeling cleansed. But strip away the film, strip away the music, and look at what Schindler actually was. He was a war profiteer. He was a member of the Nazi Party, not as resistance, but as strategy. He attended the rallies. He cultivated the relationships. He drank with the officers who ran the camps. He moved to Krakow specifically to exploit the cheap Jewish labor that the Reich's persecution had made available. He was not, in 1939, a man secretly horrified by what he saw. He was a man using it. Most people stop at the rescue and forget the arrival. And that's exactly where the psychology becomes important. Because what changed Schindler wasn't ideology. Historians debate this endlessly. What seems to have changed Schindler was proximity. He saw Amon Goeth shoot a Jewish woman from his balcony for walking too slowly. And something inside the war profiteer, something that had been carefully buried under ambition and cognac and tactical self-interest, cracked. What happens next is the part that makes Schindler irreducibly anti-heroic. He doesn't confess, he doesn't defect, he doesn't become a martyr. He uses his existing corruption to subvert the system from within. He bribes, he lies, he manipulates men just as evil as he once was. He spends his entire fortune, the fortune he built on exploitation, to buy back human lives. He uses the monster's tools to do the human thing. That is the anti-hero in its purest form. And here's the real-life mirror. How many times have you told yourself, "I'll do the right thing, but only once I've secured myself first. Only once I have enough. Only once I have the position, the leverage, the resources." Schindler spent years building the capacity to do good, while actively doing harm. The uncomfortable question history asks us is this: is that a moral failure? Or is it the only honest description of how most change actually happens? The revolutionary who refused to win. Here is a man who could have taken power. He was offered it, repeatedly, and he refused it every single time. In 1914, Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa rode into Mexico City at the head of the most powerful revolutionary force in the country's history. The presidential palace was open. The capital was theirs. He sat in the president's chair, looked at it, and left. Not because he was indecisive, not because he was afraid, but because Zapata understood something that almost no revolutionary in history has ever truly understood. Power is not the point. Justice is the point. And the moment you take the seat, you become the thing you fought against. He went back to Morelos, back to the land, back to the people, back to the fight he actually believed in, not the power he could have claimed. And history remembers him as a hero. But in his lifetime, he was called a bandit, a terrorist, an obstacle to progress. The Mexican government tried to negotiate with him, defame him, and ultimately assassinate him, which they succeeded in doing in 1919 through betrayal, through a staged peace offer that was a trap. He rode into that meeting knowing it might be a trap. Witnesses say he suspected it. He went anyway, because the cause was larger than his survival. This is the part of the anti-hero archetype that we almost never talk about. The willingness to be destroyed by the thing you love. Most people know this feeling, not on a revolutionary scale, but in smaller, quieter ways. The relationship you stayed in too long because leaving felt like abandonment. The job you kept fighting for because it represented something you believed in, even as it was slowly erasing you. The cause that cost you everything. Zapata wasn't fighting a government. He was fighting the ancient, unbroken human tendency to let the powerful define the terms of justice. And that fight didn't end in 1919. It never ends. The man who saved the world and was destroyed by it. Some stories are not dramatic. They're just wrong. Alan Turing broke the Enigma code. By virtually every serious historical estimate, his work shortened World War II by at least 2 years. The conservative projection of lives saved begins at 14 million. 14 million people. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't lead a charge. He sat in a cold room in Bletchley Park and thought, with a ferocity and originality that no institution had taught him and no system could have produced. And he solved the unsolvable. And then, after the war, the British government chemically castrated him. Because he was gay. This is where the anti-hero dynamic inverts in a way that's almost unbearable to sit with. Because Turing was not an anti-hero by choice. He was made into one by a society that couldn't accommodate what he was. He broke no law he believed was just. He committed no violence. He sought no power. He simply existed, brilliantly, authentically, with a kind of radical intellectual honesty that made the mediocre men around him profoundly uncomfortable. And they used the one thing they had, the law, to destroy him. The psychological truth of Turing's story is this. The system will accept your sacrifice. It will spend your gift. And then, if you do not fit, it will discard you. Not out of malice always. Sometimes out of something worse. Indifference. Turing's anti-heroism isn't in what he did. It's in what he was. A man who refused to make himself smaller to survive. In a world that punished him specifically for that refusal. You may have felt a version of this. The organization that needed your talent and rejected your person. The family that celebrated your achievements and couldn't accept your truth. The world that wanted your contribution and not your complexity. Turing's story asks the most painful question an anti-hero can pose. What do you owe a world that will not protect you? He gave it everything, and it still wasn't enough. The general who was never given her title, she carried a gun. This is the part they leave out of the children's book. Harriet Tubman was not simply a courageous woman who led enslaved people to freedom along the Underground Railroad. She was a military strategist, a spy, an armed operative who conducted 19 missions into enemy territory, liberated over 300 people, and told every single one of them the same thing. If you try to turn back, I will shoot you, not as cruelty, as mathematics. One person turning back, panicking, getting caught, talking, could destroy the entire network, could get dozens killed, could close the road for everyone who came after. She understood what most people never want to understand. Compassion, at scale, sometimes requires a ruthlessness that looks nothing like compassion. During the Civil War, the Union Army used her as a spy. She gathered intelligence behind Confederate lines, organized a network of informants, and helped plan the Combahee River raid, which liberated over 700 enslaved people in a single operation. She was never given a military rank. She was paid almost nothing. For years after the war, she was denied a pension. The system she helped save refused to recognize her as a soldier. And here is the anti-hero wound that runs through Tubman's entire story. She operated with a moral certainty that the legal and social framework of her time called criminal. Helping enslaved people escape was a federal crime. Espionage, officially, was not her role. Armed resistance was not what women, certainly not black women, were permitted to embody. She did all of it anyway, not recklessly, strategically. The dangerous part is this. Harriet Tubman is now safely canonized. She appears on proposed currency. Children dress as her for school plays. We have made her comfortable, and in doing so, we have quietly removed the thing that made her truly radical, her willingness to break the law, carry a weapon, and threaten the people she was saving, in service of a justice the law itself refused to provide. Sanitizing the anti-hero is how we avoid the question they're really asking. The question Tubman's life asks is simple and devastating. When the law is the injustice, what then? The man who gave the world light and died in darkness. He wanted to give electricity to the world, for free, not as a product, not as a business, as a gift. A fundamental restructuring of what energy was. Not a commodity owned by companies, but a force of nature made available to all of humanity, the way sunlight is available to all of humanity. Nikola Tesla was not simply an eccentric inventor. He was a man whose imagination was so far ahead of his time that the institutions of his era could only engage with him in one way. Extract the useful parts, discard the rest. Thomas Edison used his labor and stole his credit. J.P. Morgan funded his greatest project, the Wardenclyffe Tower, designed to transmit free wireless electricity across the globe. And then, when he realized there was no way to meter free electricity, no way to charge people for something that moved through the air, he withdrew the funding and had the tower demolished. They didn't destroy the tower because it wouldn't work. They destroyed it because it would. Tesla died in a small hotel room in New York City, alone, nearly broke. With hundreds of patents and a mind that had given the modern world alternating current, the radio, the foundations of X-ray technology, and wireless transmission. The world he built was electric. His death was a quiet darkness. This is the anti-hero as tragic visionary. The man whose crime was not violence or rule-breaking, but scale of imagination. He didn't threaten the law, he threatened the business model. And that, in industrial capitalism, is a far more dangerous transgression. Maybe you've been this person, in a smaller room, with smaller stakes, but with the same essential wound. The one whose idea was too big for the organization. The one who cared too much about the outcome and not enough about the optics. The one who gave generously to a system that rewarded accumulation. Tesla's story doesn't end with his death. It ends with every person who has ever watched their best work be absorbed, repackaged, and monetized by someone who never believed in it. The most human part of Tesla is not his genius. It's the faith he kept in a world that kept betraying it. What these lives are really saying. Every single figure we've examined carries the same wound. Different century, different cause, different weapon, same wound. They each saw a gap between what the world was and what the world should be. And instead of making peace with that gap, the way most of us do, the way we're socialized to do, the way survival usually requires, they stepped into it. Psychologists call the cognitive structure that enables this kind of person high internal locus of control combined with low need for social approval. In plain language, they genuinely believed their actions could change things. And they genuinely didn't need the world's permission to try. That combination is extraordinarily rare. It's also extraordinarily costly, because the world does not reward people who refuse its permission structures, not while they're alive, not usually. The anti-hero's defining psychological trait is not courage, not brilliance, not moral superiority. It is the willingness to absorb consequences, to look at the cost, social exile, legal persecution, poverty, death, and decide that the thing being fought for is worth more than the comfort of compliance. And here is where the mirror turns toward us. Most of us know, somewhere deep and quiet, what we would fight for if the cost were lower. We know the injustice we'd name if naming it weren't dangerous. We know the system we'd challenge if we could afford to lose. The anti-hero is not a different species. He is the version of us that ran the calculation differently, that decided the cost of not acting was higher than the cost of acting, that chose the wound of resistance over the slow suffocation of complicity. The dangerous part, the part we never say out loud, is that they were often right. And we know it, and that's why we can't look away. The anti-hero in your own story. There is a smaller, quieter version of this archetype in every life. You don't have to be breaking an unjust law or transmitting electricity from a tower on Long Island to understand what it costs to act against the consensus of your world. You know what it feels like to see something clearly that the people around you refuse to see. You know what it feels like to make a choice that your community calls wrong, that history or time or simply your own conscience will call right. The parent who raised their child differently and was judged for it. The employee who named the dysfunction and was sidelined for it. The person who left the religion, the marriage, the career, and was told for years that they had made the wrong choice. You may have been the anti-hero of someone else's story already, and they may have called you difficult, selfish, dangerous, wrong. What these historical figures teach us, not as comfort, but as instruction, is this. The verdict of your immediate world is not the verdict of time. That's not a promise. History is full of anti-heroes who were simply wrong, who broke the rules for reasons that didn't hold, who left damage that never healed, who mistook their own will for moral authority. The anti-hero is not automatically right, but the anti-hero asks the question the rest of us are too comfortable to ask. Who decided these were the rules? Who benefits from my compliance? And what am I protecting when I protect this system? Those are not easy questions. They're not supposed to be what we're really looking for. Here is the truth beneath all of it. We are drawn to the anti-hero not because we worship rule-breaking, not because we want chaos, not because we secretly wish we could get away with what they got away with. We are drawn to them because they did the thing we most deeply fear and most desperately need. They took the cost seriously, and acted anyway. They didn't pretend the price was small. Schindler lost everything he'd built. Zapata lost his life. Turing lost his freedom. Tubman carried a gun she was prepared to use on people she was trying to save. Tesla died alone in a room the world had already forgotten. They knew. They went anyway. And somewhere in us, in the part that is tired of calculating safety, tired of performing compliance, tired of watching the gap between what is and what should be grow wider every year, we recognize that. We ache for it, not the suffering, but the clarity. The moment when a person stops negotiating with their own conscience and simply acts from the deepest available truth. That's not a historical phenomenon. That is the oldest human hunger. The hunger to matter, to be used for something real, to look back from the end of a life, whatever the cost, and know that you were not simply decorative, that you were necessary. The anti-hero's final gift to us is not inspiration in the easy sense. It is permission. Permission to hold the contradiction, to be imperfect and serious at the same time, to use whatever tools the world gave you, even the wrong ones, in service of the right thing. To act without waiting for the world to call you a hero first. Because the world almost never does, not while you're in it. The monument comes after the wound. And the question, the only question any of this leaves us with is, what are you waiting for? If this stayed with you, if you felt something in the cost these people paid, then you're ready for the next exploration. Because there is a figure in cinema who embodies every single one of these wounds at once. A man written as a villain, directed as a tragedy, and understood by every person who has ever watched him as something uncomfortably close to themselves. His name is Walter White, and his story isn't about a man who became evil. It's about a man who finally stopped pretending he wasn't. That one is next.